Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you again. We're here today with two sections to our meeting. The first hour, we'll continue with our study on the Atomic Energy Canada Limited Facility at Chalk River and the status of the production of medical isotopes. In the second hour, we will go to complete, hopefully, our report on integrated energy systems. And that will be an in-camera session, but we are televised here for the first hour. And we have with us today three different groups. I'll have each group present around 10 minutes, and then we'll go to the questions and comments from members. So if we could start right away. We have in the first group MDS Nordion, and we have Steve West, President, Jill Chitra, Vice President, Strategic Technologies, and John Campion, Legal Counsel, Partner, Fasken Martineau Law Firm. So I understand that Mr. West will be making the presentation for MDS Nordion this afternoon. Go ahead, please, for up to 10 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Steve West. I am the President of MDS Nordion. Accompanying me today, Jill Chitra, Vice President, Strategic Technologies, and John Campion, Counsel to MDS Nordion. Today, the world's medical isotope supply relies on old and unpredictable reactors.
Relies on old and unpredictable reactors. The medical community lives on a knife edge every day and will continue to do so until we resolve this issue. The reason for the current supply shortage is ACL's decision to cancel the Maple project. Had the Maple project been completed as originally planned in 2000, Canada would not be in this predicament today. The Maple reactors were designed to fully support the world's demand of the nuclear medicine community and the patients they serve. While there are other reactors in the world, none of them alone or together can meet the world needs reliably. Maples are state-of-the-art reactors. Their sole purpose is to produce medical isotopes. The Maple reactors are complete and await final commissioning. The Maples have created isotopes. The Maples can and should be brought into full service. We recognize that this requires external expertise, and we are urging the government to reconsider its decision to stop the Maple project. The Maple project is Canada's opportunity for medical leadership and scientific innovation. The cancellation of the Maple project is a detrimental loss to Canada. The Government of Canada agreed with ACL's decision to abandon the Maples. It was not a reasonable public policy for Canada or for the world. It was the wrong decision. It was wrong for global long-term supply of medical isotopes. It was wrong for the patients who rely on this vital product for the treatment of cancer and heart disease. And it was wrong for the future of scientific innovation in Canada. It was a mistake in public policy. Now I would like to emphasize 4 key points. First, let me begin with the role of MDS Nordion in the nuclear industry. MDS Nordion is an Ottawa-based life sciences company with more than 600 highly skilled employees at locations in Ottawa, Laval, Vancouver, and Belgium. Nordion is a business unit of MDS Inc., a Canadian global life sciences company. Headquartered in Ontario, and providing products and services for drug discovery and development. In 2008, MDS undertook $156 million of R&D in Canada. Innovation is critical to our success. Over the past 2 years, MDS Nordion has attracted more than $20 million in R&D to Ottawa and Canada through its various collaborations. The NRU shutdown is having a significant impact on medical isotope production and Nordion's ability to supply medical isotopes to the nuclear medicine community. The shutdown is also having a negative impact on MDS Nordion's and Canada's reputation as world leaders in isotope supply. My second point addresses our view of the current medical isotope shortage. Current shortage arose on May the 18th, 2009, when ACL announced that its NRU reactor would be out of service for more than 1 month. As that now stands, it's more than 3 months. The NRU reactor is one of 5 reactors in the world capable of producing large quantities of isotopes. The second largest producer is the Penton reactor in the Netherlands, which accounts for 30% of the world's supply. It was also shut down recently due to a water leak. It has been announced that the Penton reactor will be shut down for 5 to 6 months early next year to repair that leak. This reinforces my earlier point. The current reactors are old and they are unreliable. Given these facts, how could we not reactivate the Maple project? It is the only prudent decision to provide secure supply for the medical community. Why would you not restart the Maples for the well-being of patients worldwide? My third point addresses MDS Nordion's commitment to stable medical isotope supply, short and long term. In the mid-1990s, MDS Nordion recognized the serious nature of the aging global reactor infrastructure and contracted with ACL to construct and bring into service 2 nuclear reactors and a processing facility. This agreement came to be known as the Maple Project and was intended to secure a long-term supply of medical isotopes. Originally slated to be operational in 2000, ACL agreed to build the Maples for $145 million to be fully paid by MDS Nordion and at no cost to the taxpayer. The Maple reactors were intended to replace NRU. On May the 16th, 2008, ACL and the Government of Canada unilaterally announced that the Maple project would be discontinued. They did so without providing a long-term plan for the supply of medical isotopes, beyond an intent to extend the license of NRU to 2016. This strategy clearly does not work. It abdicates Canada's current leadership position, and it creates a vacuum. MDS has invested $350 million in Maple. MDS has filed a court claim against ACL and the Government of Canada to bring the Maple facilities into service. The solution to the global medical isotope supply crisis is here in Canada. Both Maple 1 and 2 and the processing facility are 100% constructed. The Maple reactors worked and have achieved important milestones, including the creation of isotopes. It is inaccurate to suggest that the Maple reactors did not work. A number of international experts have publicly said that the Maple project could be completed and be brought into full service. We believe, with the assistance of nuclear experts, the Maple facilities could be producing medical isotopes for the benefit of patients worldwide. Despite our requests, it is worth noting that the Government of Canada has chosen not to include MDS Nordion in their discussions and working groups on solutions to resolve this medical isotope crisis. With over 60 years' experience in the medical isotope industry, MDS Nordion is well positioned to add value to these discussions. My fourth and final point addresses the impact of the reactor crisis on Canada's leadership role in the future. Canada has been a leader in isotope production and has fostered an innovative industry that creates high-value Canadian jobs. As Canada strives to maintain a leadership position in science and technology, it is critical that we focus not only on the requirements of today, but on the advancement of nuclear medicine for tomorrow. Medical isotopes are our foundation to advance research for improved drug discovery and development. They are our pathway to personalized medicine, enabling healthcare professionals to improve lives through targeted imaging and targeted therapy, thereby providing medical diagnosis and treatment specific to an individual. To advance healthcare technology for Canadians, we need new medical isotope production capacity. Secure, long-term isotope supply assurance has been and continues to be a fundamental requirement for the global nuclear medicine community, the patients they serve, and the future of innovation in healthcare. Let me repeat. The solution is here in Canada. The solution is clear. The solution is Maple. We urge the government to change public policy and restart the Maple project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. West, for your presentation today. We go now to the next witness from the University of Laval University, Michel Duguay, professor from the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. Thank you very much for coming today, Monsieur Duguay, and go ahead.
Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to give a few points of information about my background. I have a PhD in nuclear physics from Yale University. I have worked, I've had two careers, a 21-year career at AT&T Bell Labs in New Jersey, during which I spent 3 years at the Sandia National Labs working on high-power laser projects. Since, over the last 20 years, I've been a professor at Laval University in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. So this is my second career in Canada. I spent a total of 26 years in the States. For 10 years in the States, I was part of the so-called IEEE Energy Policy Committee. The IEEE is the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. We used to meet in Washington about every 2 months, and we discussed all aspects of energy, including nuclear power. And I often asked my colleagues, some of whom were nuclear engineers, what they thought about the Canadian reactors. And they were not impressed because they thought the Canadian reactors had all these tubes that were exposed to a high neutron flux and became very fragile and were subject to bursting. And so I had, when I came to Canada and I was invited by some ecological groups to look into nuclear power, I looked at it very critically. Many people have asked me, what competence do you have in nuclear power in Canada? And I can tell you that I have read 4,000 pages of documentation from AECL and from the CNSC, and I have understood those 4,000 pages. Now, one thing I've noticed in the documentation from the CNSC and the AECL is that the weakness, the basic flaw in the CANDU design, as was apparently in the Maple design, is this positive coefficient of nuclear reactivity. If a tube bursts, as it did in Pickering A in August of 1983, the pressure goes down because the water is at a very high temperature, 310 degrees Celsius. Bubbles form immediately, and that positive coefficient means that nuclear reactions are accelerated. So there can be a power spike, which according to the CNSC can increase the nuclear power, the thermal power, by a factor of 10 in a matter of 1 second. So the nuclear reactor all the time has to be under computer control because computers can only computers can react to a complex problem within a half a second. So all those reactors are under computer control, and when sometimes the sensors give wrong information to the computer, you can imagine what can happen. I happen to be a fan of Linda Keane. I have high admiration for the work that she did at the CNSC. And under her watch, the CNSC brought their regulations up to the international level. And these new regulations were adopted formally in Ottawa on June 10th, 2008. And you should know that all the CANDU reactors in Canada don't meet the new regulations. So that is why OPG has been hesitating about refurbishing the 4 reactors at Pickering. Now, regarding what my colleague here, Steve West, said, I apologize, I have to disagree. I was at the CNSC hearing in Ajax on December 10th last year, and Bill Pilkington, Vice President of AECL, said the following on page 14 of the transcripts. I would just like to point out that the Maple reactors have never actually produced isotopes, and our assessments would say that they would not have been capable of producing isotopes for many years into the future. So, I'll switch right away to a second part of my presentation. I worked for my PhD with a linear electron accelerator that uses microwave cavities to accelerate electrons. And it so happens that there's a very interesting proposal, as I'm sure you're aware of, that comes from the TRIUMPH group in Vancouver to use electron accelerators to produce technetium-99 isotopes. The UBC group, the TRIUMPH UBC group, already produces isotopes for MDS Nord ion by other techniques, other ions, not technetium. But they have here a considerable report that shows that they could easily produce as much technetium as you want by constructing perhaps half a dozen linear electron accelerators. I think their proposal is very sound. And I'll have you notice that these accelerator groups, of whom I was part for 3 years when I was at Laval at Yale University, they have always delivered. They've made these huge accelerators in the States and France, different places in the world, and they work extremely well. When you look at the nuclear side, nuclear people have not always delivered. In the States, there are 104 nuclear reactors in operation, some of which are highly controversial. But there were 117 nuclear reactors that were stopped in their construction or after their construction in the United States for various reasons. So the nuclear people don't have, the nuclear reactor people don't have the track record of people in the accelerator field. And my personal opinion on this, although I haven't studied the topic to its greatest depth, is that I would at least favorably look at this proposal by the TRIUMPH group, and I would call on your commission to go further into the study of the TRIUMPH proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Monsieur Duguay. And we'll go now to our third witness, Mr. Waddington. If you could go ahead with your presentation for up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chair, thank you for asking me to reappear before you. My name is John Waddington. I'm a professional engineer. I've spent over 40 years in the business of nuclear safety. I retired from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission in 2002 after 27 years with that organization. And since then I've provided consulting services in matters of nuclear safety to various Canadian organizations, including ACL and the IAEA. I'm appearing before you as a private individual. Following a brief discussion with your chair and your staff, I thought it might be useful to you to discuss or give you my views on the question of whether or not the Maple reactors could be restarted to make radioisotopes. I've structured this presentation in a form of questions that you might have asked me and answers, as it seemed to be the easiest way to do that. So the first question is, could indeed the Maple reactors be restarted? My answer, in principle, yes. But there would be many steps and much human and financial effort would be needed to be completed before such a direction could be successful. Perhaps I could just refresh your memory a little as to why the Maples were shut down. The first Maple, as was previously mentioned, was operating at power, though was not producing radioisotopes at that time. It was in commissioning when it was observed that its operating behavior was not exactly as expected when the reactor power was changed from one level to another. Although the difference between its observed behavior and its expected behavior was not large, it was significant in that the reactor core was slightly more reactive at higher powers than at lower powers, instead of being less reactive as the original design intended it to be. The major difference, though, was not so much the change in the sign of the power coefficient of reactivity, but the fact that there was a difference between, a discrepancy, if you wish, between prediction and observation. In nuclear safety, the designer, the operator, and the regulator all expect a very high degree of correlation between analytical predictions of how a reactor operates and the measured observations of that operation. In other words, in the Nuclear Safety Commission, we expect the design and the operation to deliver what they said they were going to deliver. After the expenditure of a very substantial effort by AECL, frankly using some very competent engineers and scientists, they could not find the reason for that discrepancy. They found some reasons for it, but they were not able to fully explain it. And the further steps that were needed to resolve that discrepancy were not readily apparent. Before the Maple reactors could be restarted, that discrepancy would still need to be explained to the satisfaction of both AECL, as competent operators and very conscious of the safety of the reactors, and of course to the satisfaction of the CNSC, and of course a license would have to be applied for and be granted by the CNSC. In my view, it would take likely a lot more time and effort to nail that discrepancy to the ground. The second question you might ask me, is it possible that the reason for the discrepancy could ever be found? My answer, I think, yes. Given enough resources, there's some very smart engineers and scientists around, I would expect that AECL, together with support from the international community, would find that reason in time. However, the question remains that how much time and effort would be needed, and is it possible right now to estimate how much effort would be needed? The answer to that second question, I think, is no, it's not possible. A formal series of tests were put together using a very formal process of investigation and didn't come up with the answers. So we're starting from a head-scratching spot again, if I may put it that way. Another question you might ask me is, could Maple be operated safely with a small positive coefficient of reactivity? I would disagree with Michel here a little, and I would say, yes, it is. Every reactor in the world has a positive coefficient for some accidents. In a PWR, it's a cold water accident, which puts positive reactor in the core. In a CANDU reactor, a power reactor, as Michel has pointed out, it's a loss of coolant accident. That's the big pipe break. But every reactor in the world has some part of its design which, if you put it into an accident condition, will result in a power increase, and the shutdown systems are designed to deal with that. And in a CANDU reactor, there are two independent shutdown systems to deal with that. Just as an aside, if Chernobyl had been fitted with a Canadian reactor shutdown system, there likely would not have been an accident at Chernobyl. That's just an aside. So, could it be operated safely with a small positive coefficient? Yes, but AECL would have to explain satisfactorily to itself and the CNSC what that discrepancy arises from before making the new safety case to the CNSC. Operation of the reactor with a small positive coefficient of reactivity would likely involve the operator moving the control rods that control the reactor more slowly than would otherwise have been the case. Obviously, if the power becomes more reactive as you increase power, you can control things a little more slowly to compensate. And I would expect that a successful prediction of observed reactor behavior would be needed as an essential element in that safety analysis. The question has arisen about an independent panel of experts. Could an independent panel of experts find the source of the problem? It is always possible that fresh eyes will see something that others have missed. I think that's evident to us all. Given the amount of effort that has been put in by AECL to date, and indeed by highly competent independent US labs as well, a panel is also likely to take substantial time and effort, in my view, and need additional experimental data to assist them coming to a firm conclusion. So it's not going to be a simple thing. It's not a question of looking at the thing and going, eureka. I can't see that happening. The Hanaro reactor in Korea generally works fine. Can't we learn from that? As I understand it, there was a significant amount of information transfer from Hanaro to AECL, whilst AECL was looking for the cause of the discrepancy. Well, the Hanaro reactor works fine, so why doesn't Maple? We don't know all the reasons for that. Hanaro is a larger reactor than Maple, and of course it doesn't use the special high enrichment fuel that is used to make radioisotopes in Maple. I would expect then that, since it's both larger and doesn't have this concentrated uranium in parts of the core, that the neutron flux in the core is a good deal less peaky. It's a good deal smoother in Hanaro. In the Maple reactor, it's a very peaky process, which makes prediction of the reactor physics that much more challenging. And it does introduce different thermal stresses in the fuel of Maple that are likely not present in Hanaro. However, whether or not these differences I've just outlined account for the difference in behavior between Maple and Hanaro is not clear. There are possible sources, but it's not clear. Another question you might ask me is, can Hanaro be used to make medical isotopes? I can't see a fundamental reason why not. No doubt the Korean regulators would need a safety case to be made to them, and the Koreans presumably would need to develop and build a new processing plant to extract the Moly-99. And I have no idea if Korea is looking at this possibility. You may ask me, do we have the right balance between nuclear safety and patient safety? And of course, you're asking me about questions that I'm not really very competent to answer. I'm an engineer, not in the medical business. And of course, it is the most difficult question of all. The nuclear industry, designers, operators, and regulators all seek a very high level of assurance of safety and a much lower level of risk to individuals and to society from the operation of reactors than is accepted in many other human activities. The medical industry is faced with a much more immediate life and death decision, and so we have a clash here of quite different views of risk. And at the end of the day, Parliament may have to decide for itself what levels of risk are acceptable in a modern society, as you indeed did when you decided to instruct the NRU reactor to reopen 18 months or so ago. The last question that I've put into your mouths, if I may, is that some have said that the NRU will never start again. Will it? Personally, I think, in fact, I'm sure it will. Corrosion is not an unknown phenomenon. The difficulties are finding the full extent of the corrosion, and that, of course, is a matter of inspection in a very difficult area, and then developing an appropriate method of repair, again, in a physically very difficult area. In addition to the need to produce radioisotopes, the long-term success of AECL's new power reactor design, the ACR 1000, is also dependent on timely experimental work planned to be done in the NRU. It seems to me that AECL's long-term future as a reactor designer of note, and again I would disagree with you, sir, on that, we can discuss it later, the assurance of the long-term safety and economics of Canada's existing fleet of power reactors and the continued development of a nuclear business in Canada depend on having a research reactor available for the supporting research that is needed to keep a complex machine running for 60 years. At the moment, that means bringing NRU back into service as soon as possible, and in the long term, it means a replacement for the NRU will eventually be needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waddington. We have heard all the presentations now, so we'll go to the official opposition, Mr. Regan, for up to 7 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And may first thank the witnesses for coming today, for taking your time. It's very much appreciated. Mr. Chairman, perhaps you'll want to suggest to Mr. Waddington and Mr. Duguay a location that perhaps they could have dinner and have their discussions. So I'm sure we can all think of some good restaurants for them. Let me begin with a question for Mr. West. Mr. West, let me ask you about why you think the Maple project was shut down. And you've heard Mr. Waddington's views on that, and Mr. Duguay's as well. What is your response to that? And in particular, what is your view in terms of the reasoning behind and the influences of the players who brought about the decision to shut down this project?
During the project and the regular updates that we were getting from ACL, since we renegotiated our agreement with ACL in 2006, there had never been any indications that they wouldn't be able to complete the project. And in the regular updates that ACL gave us, we felt confident that they would complete the project. When in 2008 the government and ACL made a decision to cancel the project, it might also have been, frankly, based upon some assumptions that might today prove to be dramatically different. Just as Dr. Waddington has said, we also are looking for the best option at the lowest risk. And the original strategy to replace NRU always was to have the Maple project, and I don't think that strategy has changed. The issue is on the execution of the strategy and the ability of ACL to execute. Clearly, we don't have all the answers. Clearly, ACL doesn't have the answers, but that we think that there are experts that can resolve it, and there are differences of opinion. But if I could quote to you something that from the National Academy of Sciences that visited Chalk River and looked at the Maple project, and this is a fairly august body of people with a lot of experts. And I'm going to quote the report, which was released in January of this year. The report states that ACL could probably contract with another organization to fix the Maple reactors if it does not have the necessary in-house technical expertise or resources to do the work itself. And then from that report, I'd like to also make another quote from that committee. The committee assumes that the worst-case scenario for fixing Maple involves the replacement of the reactor cores. The cost of such replacements would likely be small in comparison to the cost of building a new reactor.
Thank you, Mr. West. You mentioned in your comments that you said a number of international experts have publicly said that the Maple project could be completed and be brought into full service. Are you able to provide us with a list of the names and perhaps some citations of those of where they've said that? Yes,
I can. I've called on the NAS report. I can give you another one, which is an article that appeared in Nuclear Engineering International in October of 2008 from Dr. Harold Smith, who was the ex-manager Maple Nuclear Commissioning, and he stated that the Maple reactor is probably the safest reactor design in existence since it actually has 3 shutdown systems. And I think that's the point that Dr. Waddington was making as well. He also went on to say the Maple reactor operated like a dream and was fully capable of meeting all objectives.
I don't suppose there are many Canadians who might happen to be watching the proceedings of this committee who could necessarily understand the operation of a nuclear reactor. There's probably a handful, perhaps a few dozen in the country. Let me ask you, Dr. Waddington, what's your view on whether or not Canada ought to be in the business of producing isotopes?
Thank you, sir. May I just correct? Just Mr. I'm not a doctor.
Thank you.
Canada invented, as I understand it, the whole business of medical radioisotopes. And as you know, the NRU has been a very solid producer of radioisotopes for many years. So we do have a long history of producing radioisotopes. I suspect, and Mr. West will undoubtedly give you the figures, it's probably a lucrative business in the suppliers of radioisotopes. Whether it's a lucrative business at the end of the production or the beginning of the production phase, it's not clear to me. That is, when you're running it as a reactor and you're producing material in the reactor itself. So whether there's an economic advantage to that, I don't know. One of the difficulties in producing isotopes, and this was a difficulty that Maple was intended to resolve, is when you do it in a research reactor, you are having always competing demands on that reactor. And this is the same for all the reactors around the world. Research reactors are designed for research, and the management process you put in for research is quite different. You hire the brightest and the best you can. You give them the greatest freedom that you can to do their research. When you're doing something in production, this is a focused business. So there's always a problem there. And of course, Maple was intended to solve that issue, which is one of the advantages of the Maple design originally. Speaking as a Canadian, I would be very sorry to see us out of that business, given our history.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I turn it over to my colleague?
You have time for one very short question, Mr. Baines.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. My question is actually very simple and straightforward. It's the question that we've been asking in the House of Commons, which is with respects to the supply of isotopes and what the current level is. Can you, from your perspective, do you have any indication of what the current level of supply is of isotopes in Canada? Because the reason I ask is that we were told that anything less than 50% is a matter of life and death. So I think that's a grave concern, and we were trying to get a clear answer for that, and we've been told in the past it's very difficult to estimate the supply. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I can be accurate as regards to the supply of isotopes. How you translate that into medical application is somebody else's expertise. But with NRU down, there is a 30% shortage of isotope supply globally.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Baines and Mr. Regan. Before we go to Madame Brunel, you've been asked to produce some names for the committee, and I would also put the offer out to the other witnesses to bring forth names that they might have either taking that position or taking a different position on the Maples being brought back into operation in a reasonable time at a reasonable cost. So I appreciate any names that any of you would have on that. We go now to the Bloc Québécois, to Madame Brunel for up to 7 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Bonjour, Madame. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. You know, there's a difficult question that's of huge concern to us, the issue of individuals who are ill. And Mr. West, I'm surprised by what you say today, that the Maple reactor has produced isotopes in the past, yet at this committee in 2008, a former natural resources minister stated that after 12 years, no isotopes had been provided. And the minister said the same thing. So this is a question I would ask you now, and the other members of the panel, who is saying what's most accurate here? Can we get these isotopes? And in terms of safety now, for another question, Mr. Duguay told us about the issue of radioactivity and some concerns for the public in general. It raises concerns in terms of safety. is it accurate to say that we could have Maple reactors up and running safely? And Mr. Waddington, you were saying, yes, it may be possible, but it would be a great deal of effort, a financial effort, and measures to be taken. You say it's difficult to quantify how much this would cost. In hearing what you're saying, we wonder, is this just an endless pit to try to get these reactors back into full service? It might take a lot of time as well. You did raise some solution when you're saying that the NRU could be restarted. So I have a lot of questions. I've thrown them all out to you, but there are two main issues. Can Maple really provide isotopes, and would we be making concessions in the area of safety if we were to restart these reactors?
First, Mr. West, then Mr. Waddington. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for the question. Merci beaucoup. We were surprised when the Minister said that the Maples had never produced isotopes. It does require a bit of a technical explanation, perhaps, and so I'm going to ask my colleague, Ms. Chitra, to explain.
Thank you, Steve. Just a little bit of my background. I've worked with MDS Nordion for 20 years. I'm a professional engineer, and I've worked on the Maple project with AECL since its inception. Medical isotopes are produced when targets are placed in a reactor, and the reactors are operating, and neutrons impinge on the reactor, and isotopes are created. Now, AECL reported to us every month during the project from 1996 on milestones that were reached during the project. From 2000 to 2008, the Maple reactors ran numerous times at various power levels, up to 80% power. During those tests, targets were inserted in the reactor for a number of those tests. When targets are inserted in a reactor and it operates at power, isotopes are created. Moly-99 is created. Those targets were not processed because the processing facility was not yet finished commissioning. So targets inserted in the reactor operates. Those targets could be removed and processed. You would have medical isotopes for sale. So that's the explanation. It's one of the reasons we think that Maple has potential.
Do some of the witnesses have an opinion on the issue of safety? Mr. Duguay, perhaps.
As you know, the nuclear reactor safety is very controversial. As an example, some power company in the States wants to continue the operation of Indian Point near New York City, and the state of New York is suing the federal government to prevent the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the States for allowing Indian Point to continue. In Austria, a nuclear reactor had been completed. There was a referendum, and the overwhelming majority of the people decided not to put the nuclear reactor in operation. The dangers associated with the AECL reactors has been recognized numerous times by AECL itself in writing. They have said that the ACR, the Advanced CANDU reactor, should have a negative coefficient of nuclear reactivity. They have not demonstrated it yet. I think that Mr. West said something that's very good just a few minutes ago. We should look for the best option at the lowest cost. When you go into the nuclear business, it's the complete unknown. Instead of taking 2 years to develop, it might take 20 years. Instead of costing $75 million as a Shoreham nuclear reactor on Long Island was supposed to cost, it might end up at $6 billion, as it did. And it was never put in operation. So the nuclear field, unfortunately, the nuclear reactor field is a minefield. By comparison, the accelerator field is marvelous. It's taking us to the stars every day.
So, Mr. Duguay, you were telling us about the electronic accelerator from Triumph. That seems interesting. I was wondering what our other witnesses would have to say. Is this a plausible solution? Could it be of interest to us? You brought a breath of fresh air, perhaps, Mr. Duguay, with this new information. Perhaps it could be an interesting solution. I'd like your opinion, Mr. West, or...
Mr. West, go ahead, please, and Mr. Waddington.
Thank you. We also share the same opinion as Mr. Duguay that the fission project has a good potential outcome to it. In fact, we are partnering ourselves with Triumph on that project. When the government and ACL announced the cancellation of the Maple project, clearly we had to look at other options that would be available to us, and we continue to investigate other options, and that is one of the stronger options. We don't think it's the best option. We think that restarting the Maple project and finishing Maples is the best option, but certainly we're excited by the photo fission opportunity, and in our discussions with Triumph, we think this is a project that certainly merits further support.
Mr. Waddington, you were asked earlier as well to respond on the issue of whether any medical isotopes had been produced by the Maple reactors. If you could answer that first and then go on to the next question.
So on the first question, you've already had an accurate answer from Ms. Chitra that the reactor had operated as part of its commissioning, and some of those commissioning tests were with targets in, but those targets were not processed, which is why I said it didn't produce any radioisotopes in terms of output. Obviously, when you run a piece of fuel and you take fuel critical in the reactor, isotopes are produced, and that is correct.
Just for clarity,
yes,
for the committee, were there medical isotopes produced by the Maple reactor?
There would have been Moly-99 as a fission product in the fuel in the reactor.
But were any medical isotopes?
But in terms of milking that fuel and getting the moly out so that it would then go in to become a technetium-99 generator, that was not done.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarity there. On the other question.
On the other question, ma'am, you asked about safety, which is clearly of concern to you. The Maple reactors were safe throughout their operating history in terms of the commissioning tests. If they were not, they would not have been licensed, and they would not have been allowed to operate either by ACL or the CNSC. There's a very high level of safety in those reactors, which was maintained throughout their operation, and I have absolutely no doubt that that would be maintained throughout the rest of any further commissioning and any further operation. I have absolutely no question at all that the reactors are safe. I'd be quite happy to live next to them with my children and my grandchildren without a qualm. And that goes for any other major reactor today.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Brunel. We go now to the New Democrats, to Mr. Heyer for up to 7 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Finwa. Let me review what I think I've heard today. There seems to be it's the opinion of Mr. West that without Canadian production of isotopes that there is not reliable production of isotopes globally. So if Canada doesn't stay in the game, somebody's got to move quickly. I have a follow-up question on that in a minute. And then I've heard opinions by 3 people on how we should produce those isotopes. So Mr. West says fix Maple and get it going. Mr. Duguay says a much better method is to use linear accelerators. And Mr. Waddington says fix NRU. So we've got disagreement on the answer to the question. I'm not going to seek clarification on which of you is correct, but I would like to ask not only Mr. West, but anybody else who has information to bring to bear on the supply, because I'm not getting, at least I'm not hearing, a clear answer on the supply question. Just how short are we worldwide? What are the implications of what's occurring? What is the supply now, and what is the potential for various time frames in the future? And particularly, if any of you has information on, the Minister has talked about a 5-point plan to ensure the isotope supply. Do any of you know what that 5-point plan is and have an opinion on whether it can or will be effective?
Who is the question directed to, Mr. Heyer?
Anyone who can answer it.
Mr. West, do you want to answer it first?
Yeah, so we currently do not have any isotopes that we can process. NRU supplies around 30 to 40% of world demand. There are 4 other reactors. They don't actually all necessarily operate at the same time. For example, the Petton reactor, which has this water leak, will be down for the month of July. So our estimate of the shortage currently is it is around 30%. That shortage will vary by country or region. There may be a less shortage, for example, in Europe. There is a much larger shortage, I imagine, in Japan that relies primarily on Canada, in Brazil, and in North America, we would estimate the shortage to probably be higher than that 30%, probably in the area of around 50%. We have heard that there could be some potential increase in the supply. We've heard publicly from the government that the Petton reactor is going to increase somewhat. That won't make up the difference. The Australians are talking about bringing their reactor online. That's about 4% of world supply. So when you add all those figures up, we're going to be in that sort of 20 to 30% range for a long time, and we don't really have a strategy to deal with that.
That's worrisome. My interest in this is not just academic or legislative. This week I had a critical medical test using several medical isotopes, so I'm one of those Canadians who is dependent for health answers and health treatments on medical isotopes, although I'd be interested anyway. To go back to the where do we go? Where do we go here? Does anybody just want to add one more opinion, mild, strong, or otherwise, on if you were the government, what pathway would take us toward a sustainable supply of isotopes in a safe manner?
Mr. Waddington, and then Mr. Duguay.
The the shortest route to getting the supply back again is to fix Maple in the short term. I think that's clear, because any of the other routes, whether it's restart Maple or get the Australian reactor producing more, is likely to take a significant longer period of time than getting Maple back online, getting NRU back online.
Point of clarification. I heard Mr. Waddington ask about did he say fix Maple? Or
Sorry,
did he
I beg your pardon. I meant fix NRU. Thank you,
Mr. Calkins.
Thank you very much for clarifying.
I think we all knew what was being said.
But, appreciate that point. Yes, fix NRU. Fix the corrosion in NRU, because fixing Maple will take some significant time, and we don't know how long that will be. Thank you for the correction.
Yes, thanks. Okay, Mr. Duguay.
Well, I think my colleague Waddington spoke eloquently about Canada's contribution to modern science in developing the medical isotopes, which is a very healthy business in several of the Canadian provinces. I think it would be a blow to Canadian reputation, especially scientific reputation and engineering reputation, and even to the nuclear people in Canada. It would be a blow to one's reputation to just drop down the whole thing. It would be just disastrous in every respect. So I tend to agree with Mr. Waddington that we should fix the NRU, because it has worked and can be fixed, and then proceed on and look at other options like the accelerator option.
Thank you, Mr. Duguay. Mr. West, you would like to answer?
I would. I'd like just to add to that. I think fixing NRU is essential. I don't think it's the final solution, but it's essential in the short to mid-term. I think if you look at all the other options that are available, bearing in mind the time that it takes to bring on new infrastructure to create medical isotopes, if you look at all the options that are there, the best option, in our view, is to complete the Maple project. Maybe complete it under slightly different circumstances, maybe under slightly different design parameter. That will take some creativity. That's why we're recommending bringing in a panel or a consortium of experts that can look at that and look at the options and pursue those options in parallel.
Thank you, Mr. Heyer. Thank you. And we go now to Mr. Anderson for up to 7 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I guess I've been a bit disappointed in what I've heard today, because some of us have been on the committee. Were on the committee last year, and and spent a fair amount of time on this issue, actually. And Mr. West, I believe that you know better than some of the things you're saying, because we've only heard part of the issues here. We really haven't heard anything about your financial interest in this whole matter, which is substantial. And we have heard very little about the actual problem with the reactor. Last year, Mr. Waddington went through the actual functioning of the reactor. If you take a look at the testimony from June 10th last year in 2008, there's an excellent explanation of how this whole thing works and how it doesn't work. And it's very clear that there are substantial problems that cannot be fixed, and hopefully we'll get back to that. But I just want to actually read into the testimony what a couple of our colleagues said after or during our conversation last year, because we'd spent a little bit more time on this. Ms. DeBelfe from the Bloc said, Mr. West, this has more or less been a horror story from the outset. $500 million were invested in the Maple venture. We could actually talk about the Maple failure, and yet you continue to tell us it would have been in the interest of government, of taxpayers, and of your company to continue to invest in the Maple reactor. From what I understand, you do not agree with the government's decision to put an end to the Maple project. It's rather surprising you should maintain this position. It seems obvious to me this was not a good thing. And she says later, we were talking about a multi-million-dollar investment. Mr. Waddington told us that millions more would have to be invested by your company and by taxpayers in order to make the reactor work. At some point in time, you have to give up. It was a bad deal. Mr. Alghabra, who was at the time the Liberal critic and was probably the one most familiar with nuclear reactors on the committee, said, now facing the difficulties at the Maple reactor, and I don't think we can deny that there are technical difficulties with the reactor, I'm at a loss. And so I think that the government members at that time would have agreed with those statements as well. But Mr. West, I want to challenge your statement that you said at the beginning here, the reason for the current supply shortage is Atomic Energy Canada's decision to cancel the Maple project. Now, are you actually suggesting that if this project hadn't been cancelled last year, that it would now be up and running in spite of the fact that there were problems that had no apparent solution at that time? Is that what you're saying?
Thank you. Yes, if you recall what I said last time, it was that we were surprised that the Maple project was cancelled because ACL had never indicated to us that they would be unable to complete the project. My opening comments...
You knew there were problems because in the testimony it talked about the fact you were aware from 03 to 06 to 07 that there were problems with that. Now, whether you've used this as an excuse, I think, that AECL didn't tell you that they were going to shut this down, but the reality is you knew there were problems. Are you telling me those problems would have been fixed by now and that would have been up and running at this time and would have been taking care of the supply? Because that's what your statement says, that's what Canadians have heard, and if that's not accurate, I think you need to withdraw that statement.
Sir, we were very clearly informed by ACL that they would meet their contractual obligations to bring the Maples online. The original target date was October of 2008. We expected them to complete the project and meet their contractual obligations. That was our expectation. I think that actually probably what you did say last time is more accurate, and that is that you said part of your question is about the technicalities of operating reactors, and I would probably say that we are not the experts. And I think you've indicated that. But the reality is this thing would not have been up and running because there was no apparent solution. I'd like to go back to Mr. Waddington's testimony where he talked actually at length about the number of people who had been committed to trying to find a solution to this problem. He talked about AECL using a panel of their most experienced staff and outside help, finding 200 potential factors that could have been causing the problem. He said they also asked the Idaho National Laboratory in the U.S. to do an independent prediction of the behavior. It employs some of the very best reactor physicists in the world, and they have access to the most up-to-date calculational methods. He talked about AECL carried out a whole series of tests and been doing this for 2 years on the reactor itself with CNSC monitoring every step. And then he talked about the fact that AECL's management, as far as I can see, were left with a technical problem for which the solution was not immediately apparent. They had put several hundred skilled engineers and scientists on this task, as well as many external reviewers, without finding the specific cause of the problem. And actually, it was interesting to read that because the last few days, Mr. McGuinty in particular, but also Mr. Reagan, have said that no one outside of AECL reviewed what was going on there. But clearly, there were many people working on this. They weren't able to find the solution. Why would you say that we would be able to be up and running now when that was, from my information, fairly common knowledge with the nuclear community?
Mr. West, go ahead.
I'll stand by my statement. We believe that ACL were going to complete the reactor. They told us they were going to do it. We expect ACL to meet its contractual obligations. We are also urging the government to reconsider the project because we believe that there are ways to complete these reactors. And as I said, potentially looking at other options, maybe running the reactors at half power. For example, one Maple reactor can provide all of the world's medical isotope needs.
We all know that, Mr. West.
So therefore, half a Maple reactor running at half power, has that been examined? We would like a panel of experts to look at all those options, to say, hey, maybe we should run these reactors at 50% capacity, and that will at least replace NRU until we find a technical solution.
So you've had experts, you've had staff from inside and outside, you've had labs from outside the country, and you're still not willing to accept that hundreds of skilled engineers and scientists on the tax and external reviewers haven't been able to do their job properly. They've been incompetent while they've been doing it. Actually, on that subject, I'd like to just ask you a question. Why would the Canadian Medical Association Journal have had a title in their article last year in March calling AECL, or the title of it was A Black Sheep in the Nuclear Family, talking about your failure to be able to work with the international community in setting up a backup plan in order to mitigate the effects of a disruption to the world's medical isotope supply. And basically the gist of the article is that the European suppliers, the stakeholders, some of the ones from South Africa and that were very concerned about the fact they couldn't get MDS Nordion to work with them to set up a global backup plan because you wanted to put all of your eggs into NRU and Maples and they could not get you to work with them. Do you have any reaction to that article with which I'm sure you're familiar?
Actually, we have always been in contact with all the providers and worked with them. We are actually part of that group that provides that information through the APIS organization. So we do provide that information. We're not looking for confrontation. We're looking for collaboration. And in fact, I believe the Society of Nuclear Medicine has actually also said that the best option available is to complete the Maple project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson, and thank you very much to all of you. Our time is up, unfortunately. To all of you for being here today and to helping this committee with its study of this issue. We will suspend the meeting for about 2 minutes to go in camera to allow the witnesses to leave, and then we'll come back with hopefully a completion of our a review of the report on integrated energy systems. So I'll suspend just for a couple of minutes.